everybody, I'm Dr. Anu, and today I'm joined by Dr. Lara Bryden. Lara is a naturopathic doctor and the best-selling author of the Period Repair Manual and the Hormone Repair Manual. She also treats so many women with conditions like PCOS, endometriosis, and perimenopause. Welcome, Lara.
Hi, Anu. Thanks for having me.
Such a pleasure to have you here. So, let's kick off, because this is obviously your arena. What is the one thing you wish women knew about their hormones?
One of my key messages is that regular ovulation, as in having a regular natural menstrual cycle, is how women make hormones. It's how we make our hormones. I get so many patients, followers asking me, how do I boost progesterone? How do I do this? Well, it all comes back to supporting a natural, healthy ovulation. And we tend to think about, ovulation is just for making a baby, but it's not. It's how female physiology works. It's the core event, central event of the menstrual cycle and the central event of hormonal health in many ways.
And what might some of the other symptoms be if somebody is having periods, they're not on birth control, they're having periods, and they're not ovulating every cycle?
Yeah, it's actually not that difficult to figure out. If anyone's willing to go that extra step and track their cycles with temperatures, basal body temperatures, either just the old style thermometer under your tongue in the morning when you're still lying in bed before you get up, or you can wear lots of the wearable devices now. There's a few various, I think there's various period tracking apps and devices that will track the temperature and then tell you for sure whether you're ovulating or not. So that's the most gold standard way to figure out if you're ovulating. But other signs might be, as I said, if the flow is unusual in some way, if it's longer than 7 days or heavier than 80 milliliters over all the days of the flow, that can indicate an ovulatory. Another indication might be if the cycle is outside of the parameters of the sort of normal, getting a period every 21 to, in adult women, 35 days. If it's outside of that, cycles might be anovulatory, although especially short cycles, shorter than 21 days is unlikely to be an ovulatory cycle. Longer could be, especially in younger women, they could just be taking a while to ovulate. Other signs might be just not noticing any of the normal fertile signs, no fertile mucus, no kind of changes with breasts in the post-ovulatory luteal phase. Often women who, when they start tracking ovulation, they can feel it. They know kind of when they've ovulated. They kind of get a sense of that. So it's that idea of knowing if and when you ovulate is called body literacy, which I love. It's just such a great term. It's just such an important aspect, really, of our health. So I would encourage listeners to, if they haven't tried to tune into that already, just try to get a sense. It's not complicated. Do you have anything to add to that? Other signs of anovulatory cycles that you work with your patients?
I think periods can be harder. I mean, with anovulatory cycles, essentially everything can be magnified, and what we classically see, as you so beautifully described, is the beginning, when a woman first comes into starting the menstrual cycle, they're anovulatory, and we have that matching tail off at the end of perimenopause. Yeah. And it's not just the random unpredictability, but of course you get all the emotional symptoms of lack of progesterone, which is made. You mentioned something very interesting before, which was about the fact that if women are on birth control, or the majority of types of birth control, that they don't ovulate. From your perspective, why is that a problem?
Because ovulation is how we make hormones. So when we switch off ovulation with hormonal birth control, which is, as we've just said, most methods work that way. That's their intention, is to switch off ovulation. Then the idea was, we'll switch off ovulation. That will obviously switch off our main hormones, estradiol and progesterone. And then the thinking was, but we'll just replace those with the synthetic version and the brain. So real progesterone that we either make by ovulating, or we make during pregnancy, or we can take as a body identical or bioidentical hormone. Things that we're getting, for example, that women on hormonal birth control have altered brain structure compared to women who cycle naturally. There was a study a few years ago, a Canadian study, that found that women who took hormonal birth control as a teenager, even after they were no longer taking the medication. So that's because hormones like our main estrogen, estradiol, and progesterone affect the brain during that puberty, developmental phase of the brain, on an ongoing basis. Our brain is think about it, the 3 generations of women that have been, it's happening at a scale that is quite mind-boggling, have enjoy the benefits of their own hormones. What has happened to women with regard to hormonal birth control? If you think about it, what a strange thing that would be if we said to men, look, from the switches off your testosterone, and then we're going to get like estrogen, and it could affect your era of contraceptive drugs used in this way. As we said, in most cases does not, entirely switch off ovulation. The future will bring even more methods of avoiding pregnancy hormonal system.
Right, it's such a huge thing, isn't it? And what do you say to women who need some form of contraception? What would you?
Yeah, well, just that. So there's things coming. So already, just as a brief survey, condoms are great. Like every few months, I do another social media post about condoms just to kind of get a sense of the mood out there. If people are not using them, why not? The other method is fertility awareness method, which is based on the fact that as women, we're only fertile. There's ways to do it where a lot of people are starting to coil or IUD, copper IUD or hormonal IUD, which are a bit better. And there's more methods coming. So it's coming soon. I think there's something. It's just in the doctor's rooms. It's just involves a local anesthetic. It's quite a simple procedure for a man getting into the semen, and then at some future date that they can have a second injection potentially to wash that away, or have to repeat it every few years. So something like that. Don't you agree? That could be a game changer when that comes currently. So yeah.
Oh, it's so important to find solutions because obviously when the of the freedom of women were no longer shackled to but everything you've said, conditions that are happening, and we're all living longer. And what would you say to the women out there with endometriosis, for example, some of whom are being given the pill back to back, without a break in between cycles?
Yeah, so of course an example might be hormone suppression with the pill has been a strategy for endometriosis. In some of my writing around endometriosis, I do make the point that the condition is actually not a hormonal disease, so that treating it with hormone suppression is not ideal. There are lots of other ways to manage endometriosis, including treating the immune system, and then potentially with my patients getting them to the point where if once we reduce the inflammation of endometriosis, they can then enjoy the benefits of their own menstrual cycle and making their own estrogen and not have that flare up the disease. The other condition that the pill might be prescribed for and that's the one that irks me the most, because that is and followers when they find out that the medication they've been prescribed, like the telling of women, over the last few decades that the pill can regulate their cycle, the telling that lie was not necessary for anything really. I think we could have said, suppressing your hormones with the pill can relieve certain symptoms, but in the result will be you don't actually have accepted that and sort of weighed up the balance. And so if anyone's sort of listening to this and not sure what I mean, I'll just say any of the estrogen-containing methods, whether it's the pill or the NuvaRing or the juice, a fake bleed. Well, it's a real bleed, but it's not a menstrual cycle. They tend to bleed monthly on hormonal birth control. And as we were saying earlier, to make hormones, to make estrogen and progesterone on a monthly basis, and for all the benefits they give us, but have a bleed once in a while. And actually, again, a lot of women on the pill, when they find out women are getting a little grumpy about some of this, and I don't words and terms for what we're doing in women's.
That's so important, isn't it? And that women know, and that they've kind of been made to know. And I suppose even with something like endometriosis, it could be the case that, yes, it's driven by hormones and inflammation. Maybe hormone balance will help them as well as sorting out the inflammation. But this idea that they have to suppress what their own body is doing, and that's the way forward, is quite strong. It's kind of crazy. And I love the fact that you have explained to women the difference between, a withdrawal bleed, essentially, and having their own menstrual cycle. I mean, in your experience, how many women get this? How many women know the difference?
About the general population now, what the perception will be, because as you know, even a lot of doctors and journalists and even scientists don't seem to understand the difference. I find when women are presented with the information, they can understand it quite readily. But just to give some examples, there's still some science happening. I'll occasionally see a paper where they were trying to study the effect of hormones, for example, on mood or something, and they've lumped together women on hormonal birth control with women cycling naturally, kind of all as one data set. I'm like, that's not a thing. Like, women on hormonal birth control don't have hormones. I mean, just to really illustrate this, for anyone who's still kind of maybe not quite getting what I'm saying. So for anyone who's on a combined estrogen method of hormonal birth control, if you were to do a blood test for your estradiol, your main estrogen and progesterone, you would have none, essentially, pretty much menopausal. That is supposedly replacing those hormones is not the same hormones. It won't be picked up on the blood test. So, I hope that starts to illustrate the differences. And I think it will change. I really do predict that going forward, we might move into an era where we're happier to have women ovulate regularly. I have a social media hashtag that I like to use called the right to ovulate. So I think this few decades we've had of just thinking the best method is to suppress it all, shut it all down, was partly, I don't know if you agree with us, but it was sort of this attitude that, female hormones are just too complicated. They're in the too hard basket. So let's just shut it all down. And to be fair, the use of the invention of the contraceptive pill and the beginning of the use of these medications was put in place before really scientists even understood what was happening with the menstrual cycle. So, what we've learned about the menstrual cycle in the last few decades, if that had been known back in the 50s and 60s, some scientists probably would have said, put their hand up, wait, I don't think this is a good idea to shut this down. It seems like women might need their hormones.
I love what you said about the latest research where they lumped together a bunch of women who were having natural periods and a bunch of women that were on the pill, because this is a repetition of what happened with menopause, when there was no distinction made between synthetic hormones and hormones that are identical in structure to our body's own. And I guess if we want to make sure that we don't create another period, decade or more of just complete confusion, hormonal havoc, we need interviews like this. Are there any other things that you just think are really valuable to
Well, I just wanted to respond to what you're just talking about, because of course a lot of your listeners would probably know about the value of bioidentical or body-identical hormones as the type of hormone therapy. So if you're going to use hormone therapy in perimenopause or menopause, I think finally the consensus is it's actually better to use hormones that are identical to real human hormones. The same understanding is not given to young women, right? So there's all this talk about how older women, it's a lot safer to use natural hormones, but young women are still stuck using these definitely non-bioidentical, drugs, synthetic hormones that are used in hormonal birth control. So it's kind of a double standard, I think. And in some ways, I would say young women, especially teenagers, I mean, even more, I'd say teenagers are harmed by synthetic hormones more than menopausal women ever were, if you know what I mean. Like, it's sort of a, you know what I mean? Like, there's this kind of, we've fought the battle for natural hormones in one age group, but kind of forgotten about.
In many parts of the world, even for menopausal women, and I think there are probably still a lot of places where women aren't routinely being told the difference between bioidentical hormones or synthetic hormones. And then you're right, there's this whole other group of women that are just being left out. So it's...
The other thing I'll say to everyone is that, and obviously I've written a couple books about this very thing, which is that it is possible to achieve symptomless periods without the use of contraceptive drugs. In most cases, that's been my overwhelming clinical experience, especially young girls, like especially, those heavy periods, the period pain, the acne of young teenagers, that can be addressed with other treatments that are not the pill. Like, I can really assure you, just for example, we can put this in the show notes, there was just this week, so, we're recording this in September, there was a new study about using zinc, a new randomized clinical trial of using zinc to treat teenage period pain. And that's an example of something that's so simple, so inexpensive, so safe, and so there really are options for women and for parents of girls. It's not a, pill or nothing situation like we've been maybe, told for the last few generations.
What are some of the tips that you could tell women listening that they could implement now in their lives?
To have in pursuit of a better period?
Yeah.
Well, I guess one important understanding is that our menstrual health is not separate from our general health. So whatever it is that our general health needs, that's what our periods need. And that's why there's no one-size-fits-all. So just to give, some diverse examples, so there's lots of young women out there who've lost their period to undereating, like they're undereating, they're, that underfueling, then that's the main thing that they need to remedy to regain their period. Then kind of almost conversely, on the other side of things, there's women who have irregular periods or anovulatory cycles due to PCOS or due to kind of a pre-diabetic insulin-resistant condition, and they might need sort of the opposite strategy. They might need, reducing sugar and maybe looking at some gentle intermittent fasting and some supplements to improve blood sugar control to regulate their periods and get their ovulation back. And then, there's all the women who there's something inflammatory standing between them and painless, symptomless periods. One tip I would give for anyone who's struggling with pain or heavy flow is do think about trying a few months off normal cow's dairy. I talk about that in both my books, Period Repair Manual and Hormone Repair Manual, just because I think the connection is actually via the immune system. In some people, normal cow's dairy, by that I mean cow's dairy that has the A1 casein, which is really only in a couple breeds of cows. So there's quite a bit of cow dairy and goat and sheep dairy that doesn't seem to be inflammatory in the same way. But for some women, that sort of inflammatory reaction can make periods heavier, can create premenstrual mood symptoms, can worsen period pain. So yeah, it's another example of something quite simple that addresses general health that then translates into better period health. There was actually just a study about that, linking milk allergy in childhood to the frequency of premenstrual mood symptoms in adulthood, which kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Like, that's that same kind of inflammatory reaction as a kid, except you didn't outgrow it. It just kind of moved to your, to manifest or show itself in certain areas of your health, particularly period menstrual health.
And you made a link between our metabolic health and our sex hormones. Can you talk about that a bit more?
Yeah, so I think that's, I mentioned to you that my my next book is going to be all on metabolic health or maintaining healthy insulin sensitivity. If the audience knows what that is, that just means good blood sugar control, sort of reversing out of a pre-diabetic state potentially. That can be very important for maintaining good hormone health, primarily because having insulin resistance or prediabetes can impair ovulation and prevent the main event of the cycle, which is ovulation and therefore the making of progesterone. So that's sort of one of the key ways that metabolic health can impact female hormones. It goes in the other direction, though, too. Female hormones do impact our metabolic health in the sense that there's just a bit of research confirming this, but what most clinicians know is that in the luteal phase, or the post-ovulatory phase, women do kind of shift into a slightly, just temporary kind of functional, slightly more insulin-resistant state, and that makes us hungrier and not feeling like, moving the body as much. That's actually quite a normal reaction. So I think anyone who's into kind of, dieting or training together with their menstrual cycle might be familiar with some of these concepts that just sort of know where you are relative to ovulation can really kind of help inform why you're feeling a certain way, why you're hungrier or less hungry. And then, of course, perimenopause is another time when the shift in our female hormones are at that time, in our 40s, can create a shift with metabolic health, can kind of push us towards insulin resistance. So, yeah, there's a sort of a choreography or dance between female hormones and metabolic hormones that is, I think, quite important for women. And this is part of the body literacy I talked about earlier in the interview, is if if and when you ovulate, you can really start to kind of understand differences in how you feel. And it can start to feel less chaotic and more like there's a logic to it, which there is. My position is, as a biologist, I see everything through the lens of biology and evolutionary biology. And through that lens, I would say I embrace or frame female physiology as the standard, normal, default human physiology, and that means human physiology is cyclic. And then, of course, males are a little different. Men are a little different. They're quirky in that they make their testosterone every day as opposed to kind of making their hormones in a monthly pattern like we do.
And of course, we also make testosterone there as well. Do you see a lot of women who are in need of testosterone or have imbalances in that area? Testosterone's interesting, as I'm sure it's something you probably work with testosterone a bit. So it, of course, we do have just naturally quite a lot of testosterone. That's how we make our estrogen comes from testosterone. So testosterone is a precursor molecule in the female body. It also it has some benefits for bone health and mood, but there is definitely a sweet spot. I said there's a sweet spot with testosterone almost more than there's a sweet spot with estrogen or progesterone, because a little bit the right amount is good. Too much testosterone is a problem, particularly for metabolic health. That would be in PCOS, for example. That condition, polycystic ovary syndrome, is essentially by definition the condition of testosterone or androgen excess, and there's growing evidence that actually for women, androgen or testosterone excess drives or worsens insulin resistance. It's the opposite for men, actually. They have higher levels of testosterone are good for their metabolic health and insulin sensitivity, but we're the opposite. So there is a sweet spot, and there's a couple times in our life when or a couple of possibilities when excess testosterone could worsen metabolic health. One is PCOS, which I've just mentioned. The other would be into perimenopause, menopause, actually, because as both estrogen and progesterone drop away, their kind of anti-androgen effect drops away, and so more testosterone shines through. That's why in our women heading into menopause could get a bit of a bit more facial hair, and some of the shift to weight gain and insulin resistance that occurs during especially the later phases of perimenopause is actually probably in part being driven by the greater exposure to testosterone. So in terms of women taking testosterone after menopause, I think there's a role for that. So but I guess I would just say, and you can speak to this, but I think it's always important to go low with the dose and always combine it with estrogen and progesterone to kind of balance that and shelter women from
too much testosterone. Yeah.
Lara, thank you so much. I think we've covered so much about women's hormones today.
Yeah.
Where can listeners find out more about you and your work?
Yeah, I'm easy to find. So my blog is larabryden.com. Everything's there. Got links to my podcast, my social media, and as I said, I have 2 books: Peer-to-Peer Manual for women of any age, and Hormone Repair Manual for women over 40.
And what's your podcast called?
It's called the Lara Bryden Podcast. That's how easy I am to find.
Yeah. Lara, thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.